Before my accident, my life was as close to perfect as it could get. I had a great job as a regional sales manager, a house I was proud of, and a wife, Madison, who I thought was my ride or die. We'd been together for 5 years, and while our relationship wasn't perfect, I truly believed we were solid. At 35, I had everything I'd ever wanted, or so I thought. Life has a way of flipping the script when you least expect it. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was helping my buddy Greg move a heavy couch up a narrow flight of stairs. "Watch your step, bro," he joked. "Don't worry about me," I shot back, grinning. "I've got it." Spoiler alert, I didn't. One wrong step, one awkward twist, and I was tumbling down the stairs. The next thing I knew, I was flat on my back, staring at the ceiling with a pain in my spine that made my whole body go numb. At first, I thought it was nothing, a bad bruise, maybe a pinched nerve. But after an ambulance ride, an MRI, and a very grim-faced doctor telling me I had a spinal cord injury, my whole world flipped upside down. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of hospital stays, physical therapy, and endless questions I didn't have answers to. "Will I walk again?" I asked the doctor, my voice shaky. "It's too soon to say," he replied. "With time and the right rehabilitation, there's a chance. But for now, you'll need to adjust to life in a wheelchair." I nodded, trying to process the words, but it felt like my brain had short-circuited. When Madison walked into the hospital room, I thought she'd be my rock, my partner, my anchor in the storm. Instead, I got something else entirely. Her smile was forced, her hugs half-hearted, and every time she looked at the wheelchair beside my bed, I saw something in her eyes I never expected: disgust. At first, I tried to brush it off. "She's just overwhelmed," I told myself. "This is a lot for both of us." But as the weeks turned into months, it became impossible to ignore. Madison started pulling away, emotionally, physically, and in every other way that mattered. She stopped coming to my physical therapy sessions, started working late more often, and avoided any conversation about her future. The first real blow came one night when I asked her for help getting into bed. "I can do it myself," I said quickly, seeing the hesitation on her face. "No, it's fine," she replied, but her tone was flat, her hands reluctant as she helped me. When I was finally settled, I said, "Thank you, babe." Her response was a quiet, almost robotic, "You're welcome," before she turned away and scrolled on her phone. Over time, her coldness became more than just emotional distance. It turned into outright resentment. "You don't understand how hard this is for me," she said one night during an argument. "For you?" I shot back, my voice rising. "I'm the one in the damn wheelchair, Madison. I'm the one busting my ass in therapy every day to get better." She crossed her arms, glaring at me. "Yeah, and I'm the one stuck picking up the pieces of our life while you sit there feeling sorry for yourself." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. Looking back, that was the moment I should have seen the writing on the wall. But I didn't. I kept holding on, hoping things would get better. Then came the night I found out she was cheating. It was a Tuesday. Madison had told me she was going out for drinks with coworkers. "Don't wait up," she said, barely glancing at me as she grabbed her purse. I had a weird feeling in my gut, but I ignored it until I saw her phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. A text from someone named Liam lit up the screen. "Liam, can't wait to see you tonight. I've missed you." My heart dropped. I knew I shouldn't, but I picked up the phone and scrolled through their messages. The more I read, the more nauseous I felt. Madison wasn't just cheating. She'd been doing it for months. While I was in therapy, while I was struggling to adjust to my new reality, she'd been sneaking around with some guy from her office. When she came home that night, I confronted her. "Who's Liam?" I asked, holding up her phone. Her face went pale, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then she sighed, crossing her arms. "He's someone who makes me feel alive," she said coldly. I stared at her, my chest tightening. "Are you serious right now? You're cheating on me while I'm stuck in this wheelchair, trying to rebuild our life?" She shrugged, her expression indifferent. "You're not the same person I married, Ryan. I didn't sign up for this." Those words were like a knife to the gut. "I didn't sign up for this," I repeated, my voice trembling. "What happened to in sickness and in health? What happened to loving me no matter what?" Madison didn't answer. She just grabbed her things and walked out the door. The next morning, I woke up to find her side of the closet empty. She didn't leave a note, didn't say goodbye. She just left. For a while, I felt like my world had ended. I was alone, broken, and drowning in anger and pain. But what I didn't realize was that Madison leaving was the best thing that could have happened to me. After Madison left, I spent the first few weeks in a haze of anger and self-pity. I'd wake up in the mornings, stare at the empty side of the bed, and feel this pit in my stomach that seemed to grow with every passing day. The house felt eerily quiet without her. No arguments, no slammed doors, no passive-aggressive sighs, just silence. You'd think that would have been a relief, but it wasn't. It was a reminder of everything I'd lost. At least, that's how I saw it at first. Jason, my best friend since college, had no patience for my wallowing. "She did you a favor, man," he said bluntly as he sat on my couch with a bag of takeout. "A favor?" I shot back, glaring at him. "She cheated on me, Jason. She left me when I needed her the most." "Exactly," he said, shoving a fry into his mouth. "You're better off without someone like that. She showed her true colors, and now you can focus on you." "I don't even know who I am without her," I muttered, staring at my wheelchair. Jason rolled his eyes, then figured out. "You got a chance to rebuild, Ryan. Don't waste it." As much as I hated to admit it, Jason had a point. Madison was gone, and she wasn't coming back. I could either let her betrayal define me, or I could use it as fuel to rebuild my life. So, I started small. The first step was physical therapy. When I first started going after the accident, it felt like torture. Every session was a painful reminder of what I couldn't do. But now I approached it with a new mindset. Every rep, every stretch, every exercise was a step toward proving Madison and myself wrong. "I'm not done," I told myself during every grueling session. "This isn't the end." The progress was slow at first. I'd spend hours trying to strengthen muscles that had been dormant for months, celebrating every tiny victory like it was a championship win. The first time I stood on my own for a few seconds, I felt like I'd climbed Mount Everest. "You're making great progress, Ryan," my physical therapist said with a smile. "Not fast enough," I replied, gritting my teeth as I pushed through another set of exercises. "Recovery isn't a race," she said. "It's a journey." But for me, it wasn't just about physical recovery. It was about reclaiming my life. I threw myself into work, taking on freelance consulting projects from home. At first, it was just a way to distract myself from the emptiness, but soon it became something more. With every project I completed, I gained confidence in my abilities. I wasn't just a guy in a wheelchair. I was someone who could still contribute, still build something meaningful. As the weeks turned into months, I started to see real progress. I upgraded my wheelchair to a sleek, modern model that made it easier to get around. I reorganized the house to make it more accessible, removing anything that reminded me of Madison in the process. And slowly but surely, I started to walk again. The first time I took a few shaky steps on my own, I almost broke down. "Holy crap, man, you're walking!" Jason shouted when I showed him. "Barely," I said, grinning. "But it's a start." "A start," he repeated. "Dude, it's a miracle. You're going to be running marathons by next year." By the time I was fully mobile again, I'd started to feel like myself. No, better than myself. I wasn't the same man who had fallen down those stairs, or the man Madison had walked out on. I was stronger. But recovery wasn't just about my body or my work, it was about my mindset. I started reading self-help books, listening to motivational podcasts, and surrounding myself with people who believed in me. "Your story isn't over, Ryan," one podcast host said during a particularly tough week. "Every challenge you face is an opportunity to grow." Those words stuck with me. One night, as I was scrolling through my emails, I noticed a message from a business owner I'd worked with during one of my consulting gigs. "Ryan, I've been really impressed with your work. I'm looking for a partner to help me grow my company. Let me know if you're interested." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Was this real? Was I actually being offered a chance to partner in a business? After a few days of back-and-forth emails and a Zoom meeting, it was official. I was now a co-owner of a rapidly growing tech startup. Jason couldn't stop grinning when I told him. "Look at you, Mr. Big Shot," he said, clapping me on the back. "Madison's going to regret the hell out of leaving you." "This isn't about her," I said, though part of me couldn't help but wonder if he was right. With my new role came new challenges and new opportunities. I worked harder than ever, pouring everything I had into building the company. Late nights, early mornings, and countless cups of coffee became my new normal. And it paid off. Within a year, the company had doubled in size, and I'd gone from barely scraping by to living comfortably. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. One evening, as I sat on my porch with a glass of whiskey, Jason joined me with a mischievous grin. "You know what we should do?" he said. "Please don't say something stupid," I replied, smirking. "We should go out. Celebrate your comeback. Show the world the new and improved Ryan." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Why not?" That night, as I got ready to go out, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back at me. Gone was the defeated, angry guy who'd let Madison's betrayal consume him. In his place was someone stronger, smarter, and ready to take on whatever life threw at him next. Have you ever hit rock bottom and found the strength to rebuild? What motivated you to keep going? Share your story in the comments, and stay tuned. It had been nearly 2 years since Madison walked out of my life, and I was in a completely different place. Physically, mentally, emotionally, I'd rebuilt myself from the ground up. Gone was the broken man she'd left behind, and in his place stood someone who had overcome the hardest chapter of his life. The company I'd partnered with was thriving, my body was fully functional again, and for the first time in years, I was genuinely happy. But life, in all its unpredictable glory, wasn't done throwing curveballs my way. This particular curveball came in the form of an unplanned run-in with Madison. It happened on a Friday night. Jason and I had made plans to grab dinner at one of those trendy new restaurants downtown. The kind of place with overpriced steaks, dim lighting, and a wine list longer than the Bible. "Dude, you're buying," Jason joked as we walked in. "Mr. Successful Entrepreneur over here can afford it." "Fine," I replied, smirking. "But only if you promise not to embarrass me." "No promises," he shot back. The hostess led us to a table near the back, and as we sat down, I scanned the room out of habit. That's when I saw her. Madison. She was sitting at a table near the window, her back to me. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, and she was dressed to the nines in a sleek black dress. Across from her sat a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a cologne ad. Tall, sharp jawline, expensive suit. For a moment, I froze. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Ryan?" Jason's voice snapped me out of my trance. "What?" I said, my eyes still glued to Madison's table. Jason followed my gaze and let out a low whistle. "Is that?" "Yup," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Damn," he muttered. "What are the odds?" I wanted to look away, to focus on anything else, but I couldn't. Seeing her again brought back a rush of emotions I wasn't prepared for. Anger, sadness, and surprisingly, a strange sense of indifference. The woman sitting at that table wasn't the same person who had walked out of my life, and I wasn't the same man she'd left behind. Jason, of course, couldn't resist stirring the pot. "Should we say hi?" he asked, grinning mischievously. "No," I said quickly. "We're not doing that." "Come on," he said, leaning forward. "Think of it as closure." "I already have closure," I replied, my tone firm. Jason raised an eyebrow. "Doesn't look like it from the way you're staring." I shook my head, trying to shake off the nerves. "Let's just eat and get out of here." But fate had other plans. Halfway through dinner, Madison turned in her seat, her eyes scanning the room. When her gaze landed on me, her expression froze. For a moment, we just stared at each other, like two strangers who'd crossed paths in a dream. Then, she smiled, a small, hesitant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh," Jason muttered under his breath. "Here we go?" Madison stood up, excused herself from her table, and started walking toward me. "Ryan," she said when she reached our table, her voice soft. "Wow, it's been a long time." "Yeah," I replied, my tone neutral. "It has?" She looked me up and down, as if trying to piece together the man standing before her with the one she'd left behind. "You look good," she said, her smile faltering. "Thanks," I replied, not offering the same compliment in return. Jason, ever the chaos-loving friend, decided to make things even more awkward. "So, you must be Madison," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I've heard so much about you." Madison's smile tightened. "And you are?" "Jason," he said, grinning. "Ryan's best friend. The one who helped pick up the pieces after you left." "Jason," I said sharply, shooting him a warning look. "What?" he said, feigning innocence. "Just being honest." Madison cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, I just wanted to say hi. It's good to see you, Ryan." "Yeah," I said again, my tone giving nothing away. "You too." As she turned to walk away, Jason muttered under his breath, "She's probably wondering how the hell you ended up doing so well." After dinner, as we walked out of the restaurant, I couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. Seeing Madison again had stirred up feelings I thought I'd buried. "Dude, you handled it like a champ," Jason said, clapping me on the back. "Did I?" I asked, still feeling unsettled. "Hell yeah," he said. She looked like she didn't know whether to apologize or cry. That's a win in my book, but it didn't feel like a win. It felt unfinished. For years, I dreamed of this moment, of showing Madison how far I'd come, of making her regret leaving me. But now that it had happened, I realized I didn't need her regret. I didn't need anything from her. That night, as I sat on my couch with a glass of whiskey, I thought about the man I'd become. The successful entrepreneur, the guy who'd fought his way back from the lowest point of his life. I didn't need Madison to validate my progress. Her opinion didn't matter anymore. I'd won. Not because I'd succeeded, but because I'd moved on. After running into Madison at the restaurant, I expected to feel some kind of closure. Instead, all it did was reopen old wounds I thought had healed. I kept replaying the encounter in my head. Her hesitant smile, the way she looked at me, like she was surprised I'd survived without her. Hell, maybe even surprised I'd thrived. Jason, of course, couldn't let it go. You know what she's thinking, right? He said the next day while we were grabbing coffee. No, but I'm sure you'll tell me, I muttered. She's regretting the hell out of leaving you, he said, grinning. And if she's not, she should be. I shook my head. It doesn't matter. I'm over it. But was I? The truth was, seeing Madison stirred up feelings I hadn't dealt with in years. Not because I wanted her back. God, no. But because it reminded me of how low I'd felt when she left. I'd spent so much time building myself back up that I hadn't stopped to process what it all meant. Was I truly over it? Or was I just burying the pain under layers of success and forward momentum? I wasn't sure. Life, as usual, decided to test me in the most unexpected way. A few weeks later, I got a text from an unknown number. Hey Ryan, it's Madison. Can we talk? My stomach twisted as I stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to delete the message and move on, but another part, call it curiosity, call it stupidity, wanted to know what she had to say. Against my better judgment, I replied, What do you want, Madison? She responded quickly, I know I don't deserve your time, but I really need to talk to you. Can we meet? I hesitated before typing back, fine. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., the park near downtown. The next day, as I sat on a bench waiting for her, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, confusion, and, oddly enough, indifference. When Madison finally showed up, she looked nervous. Her hair was tied back, and she was wearing a simple sundress, a stark contrast to the polished, confident woman I'd seen at the restaurant. Thanks for meeting me, she said, sitting down beside me. Let's cut to the chase, I said, crossing my arms. What do you want, Madison? She took a deep breath, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I've been thinking a lot since I saw you at the restaurant. About us. About everything I did. And I prompted, keeping my tone neutral. I made a mistake, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Walking away from you, it was the biggest mistake of my life. I laughed, an actual laugh, loud and bitter. Now you figure that out? 2 years later? After you cheated on me and left me to deal with everything alone? I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said quickly. But I need you to know how sorry I am. I was selfish and scared, and I took the easy way out. The easy way? I repeated, my voice rising. You didn't just walk out, Madison. You tore me apart. Do you have any idea what it felt like to sit in that wheelchair, wondering if I'd ever be enough for anyone again? Tears welled up in her eyes. I was wrong, Ryan. I see that now, and I want to make it right. I shook my head, disbelief coursing through me. You don't get to come back now, Madison. You don't get to waltz in and act like an apology erases everything you did. I'm not asking for a second chance, she said quickly. I need to know if you can forgive me. For both of our sakes. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. Forgiveness. It was such a simple word, but it carried so much weight. Could I forgive her? Could I let go of the anger and resentment that had fueled me for so long? I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized something. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't love her either. She was just someone I used to know. I don't hate you, Madison, I said finally. But I don't forgive you either. Not yet. Maybe someday, but not today. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for being honest. I stood up, looking down at her one last time. Take care of yourself, Madison. And with that, I walked away. As I left the park, I felt a strange sense of relief. Not because I'd gotten closure from Madison, but because I'd realized I didn't need it. Her actions had hurt me, yes, but they didn't define me. I wasn't the broken man she left behind. I was stronger, smarter, and better than I'd ever been. That evening, as I sat on my porch with a glass of whiskey, Jason showed up unannounced, as he often did. So, how'd it go? He asked, sitting beside me. She apologized, I said simply. And I told her the truth, I said, taking a sip of my drink. I don't hate her, but I don't forgive her yet, either. Jason nodded, clinking his beer bottle against my glass. Good for you, man. You don't owe her anything. As the sun set and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. Madison was a chapter in my story, one filled with pain, betrayal, and lessons learned the hard way. But she wasn't the whole story. I was the author of my life now, and the chapters ahead were mine to write. The meeting with Madison had been unexpected, but it left me with a clarity I hadn't realized I needed. It wasn't just about her apology or the fact that I'd finally told her how much she'd hurt me. It was about realizing that I was free, truly free, from the chains her betrayal had wrapped around my life. The anger I'd carried for years had been like a backpack full of bricks. I hadn't realized how heavy it was until I started to let it go. That night on the porch, with Jason cracking jokes about how I should have charged Madison for emotional damages, I realized something important. My future was mine, and no one else had control over it anymore. The next morning, I woke up with a newfound sense of purpose. Life had thrown me curveballs, sure, but I'd hit every single one of them back. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The company I'd partnered with was growing faster than I'd ever expected. My days were filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and late nights spent brainstorming with my team. It was exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. And then there was Sophie. We'd met at a business networking event a few months earlier, and she'd completely thrown me off my game. She was smart, funny, and had this no-nonsense attitude that reminded me of who I'd always wanted to be. At first, I thought she was way out of my league. She was running her own marketing firm, juggling clients like a pro, and had a confidence that was impossible to ignore. But somehow we clicked. Our first date was at this little hole-in-the-wall Italian place Jason had recommended. "You're either going to love it or get food poisoning," he'd said, smirking. Luckily, it was the former. We spent hours talking about everything: our careers, our families, the embarrassing moments that had shaped us into who we were. At one point, Sophie leaned forward, her eyes sparkling. "So, what's your story, Ryan?" she asked, swirling her glass of wine. "What do you mean?" I replied, pretending I didn't know exactly what she was asking. "You're successful, charming, and way too humble for someone who's clearly got his life together," she said, grinning. "What's the catch?" For a moment, I hesitated. Did I really want to tell her about Madison? About the accident, the betrayal, the years of rebuilding? But then I realized something. My past wasn't a weakness. It was proof of how far I'd come. So I told her everything. When I finished, Sophie didn't look at me with pity or judgment. She just nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Well," she said, raising her glass, "here's to second chances and proving people wrong." "To that," I said, clinking my glass against hers. As the months went by, Sophie became a bigger part of my life. She didn't just support me, she challenged me, pushed me to be better, and reminded me that I was capable of so much more than I had ever believed. "You're the most determined person I've ever met," she said one night as we sat on my couch, watching a movie. "Seriously, if I ever get stuck in a crisis, I'm calling you first." "Good to know," I said, grinning. "But let's hope it doesn't come to that." While Sophie and I were building something new, Madison remained a distant memory. I'd occasionally think about her, about the life we'd once shared and the pain she'd caused, but those thoughts no longer consumed me. Every now and then, I'd hear through the grapevine that she was struggling. A mutual acquaintance mentioned she'd lost her job, and another said her relationship with Liam, her Cologne ad boyfriend, had ended badly. Jason, of course, took great pleasure in these updates. "Karma's a bitch," he'd say with a shrug. "Maybe," I'd reply, "but that's not my business anymore." One evening, as Sophie and I were cooking dinner together, well, I was attempting to cook while she made sarcastic comments about my lack of culinary skills. She asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think you'd ever get married again?" I froze, holding a spatula in one hand and a very poorly chopped onion in the other. "That's a big question," I said, laughing nervously. Sophie shrugged, her tone casual. "I'm not asking for a proposal or anything. I'm just curious." I set down the spatula and turned to face her. Honestly, I didn't think I'd ever want to after Madison. But now, I don't know. Maybe. Her smile widened. "Good answer." That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. For years, I'd been stuck in survival mode, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next disaster to strike. But now, I felt hopeful. Sophie wasn't Madison. She didn't judge me for my past or expect me to be someone I wasn't. She just wanted me to be me, and that was enough. A few weeks later, the company I co-owned hit a major milestone. We secured a multi-million-dollar contract with a national retailer. Jason, of course, insisted we celebrate in style. "This calls for steak, whiskey, and absolutely no thoughts of ex-wives," he said, dragging me to the fanciest restaurant in town. As we sat at the bar, sipping our drinks and reminiscing about how far we'd come. I felt a sense of pride that was impossible to put into words. I'd been through hell and back, but I'd made it. By the end of the night, as Jason and I stumbled out of the restaurant, he turned to me with a grin. "You know what, man? You're living proof that you can't keep a good guy down." "Damn right," I said, laughing. "It's funny how life has a way of coming full circle, isn't it?" 2 years ago, I was lying in a hospital bed, convinced my life was over. Madison had left me, my body had betrayed me, and I felt like I had nothing left to give. Now, as I stood in the middle of my new downtown office, the one I just bought for my company, I couldn't help but smile at how far I'd come. The walls were freshly painted, the furniture sleek and modern, and the team I'd built from the ground up was buzzing with excitement as we prepared to launch a major campaign. Jason walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you're trying to decide if you should cry or laugh," he said, handing me one. "Maybe a little of both," I admitted. He grinned. "You've earned it, man. This place is incredible." I nodded, taking a sip of my coffee. "It's not just the office. It's everything. I feel at peace, you know." Jason raised an eyebrow. "You're getting all philosophical on me. What's next? Yoga classes?" "Shut up," I said, laughing. It wasn't just the office that marked a new chapter in my life. Sophie had moved in a few months earlier, and our relationship had only grown stronger. She wasn't just my girlfriend. She was my partner in every sense of the word. She supported me, challenged me, and reminded me every day that I was capable of so much more than I'd ever believed. "Have you thought about taking the next step?" Jason asked, his tone teasing. "With Sophie?" I asked, pretending to act clueless. "No, with Waffles the dog," he shot back. "Yes, with Sophie." I smirked. "Maybe. One step at a time." As life settled into a comfortable rhythm, I thought I'd left the past behind me for good. But as fate would have it, there was still one final twist in my story. It happened on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Sophie and I were out running errands when we decided to stop at a small cafe for lunch. The place was cozy, with warm lighting and the smell of freshly baked bread wafting through the air. We found a table by the window and ordered sandwiches and coffee. I was halfway through my meal when the door swung open, and in walked Madison. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. She hadn't seen me yet, but I recognized her immediately. Her hair was tied back, and she was wearing a simple coat and jeans. She looked different, not in the glamorous, polished way she had at the restaurant. This time, she looked tired, like the weight of the world was sitting on her shoulders. She glanced around the cafe, and when her eyes landed on me, her expression froze. "Ryan," she said, her voice barely audible as she approached our table. Sophie looked up, sensing the tension. "Hi," she said, her tone polite but wary. Madison gave her a small, forced smile before turning back to me. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Small world," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "Can we talk?" I glanced at Sophie, who gave me a reassuring nod. "Go ahead," she said softly. I stood up, gesturing toward a quiet corner of the cafe. "Let's make this quick," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. Madison followed me, her hands fidgeting nervously. "I don't want to intrude," she began, her voice trembling. I wanted to say thank you for meeting me at the park that day, and for being honest with me." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, her eyes downcast. "About my choices, my mistakes, and you. I know I hurt you, Ryan, more than I can ever make up for. And I'm so sorry for that." Her apology felt genuine, but it didn't stir the emotions I thought it might. Instead of anger or sadness, I felt closure. "I appreciate that," I said simply. Madison looked up, tears welling in her eyes. "You're doing so well. I've heard about your company, your success. You've built an amazing life." "Yeah," I said, nodding. "I have." She hesitated before adding, "I'm happy for you, Ryan. Truly." "Thank you," I said, my tone calm but firm. "I hope you find the same for yourself." As Madison turned to leave, I felt a wave of finality wash over me. This was it, the last chapter of that part of my life. When I returned to the table, Sophie looked up at me, her expression curious. "You okay?" "Better than ever," I said, sitting down and taking her hand in mine. That evening, as Sophie and I sat on the couch with Waffles curled up at our feet, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led me to this moment. Madison's betrayal had broken me, yes, but it had also forced me to rebuild. And in that rebuilding, I discovered a strength I never knew I had. Life isn't about avoiding pain or setbacks. It's about what you do with them. I turned my lowest point into a foundation for something greater. And now, with Sophie by my side and the future wide open, I was ready for whatever came next. Have you ever reached a moment of true closure with your past? What did it teach you about yourself and the journey ahead? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of resilience, growth, and starting over.